Working the night shift as a cleaner in an office block was a lonely job, but it paid the bills. The routine was simple. I'd arrive at 10:00 p.m. and work until 2:00 a.m., cleaning and tidying up the building floor by floor. Most nights it was just me and Eddie, the security guard, but one night things took a chilling turn. I walked into the building, exchanged a nod with Eddie, and headed up to the 4th floor where I usually started my cleaning. It was quiet as always, the only sound being the faint hum of the office equipment in the rooms. I began my work, emptying trash cans and wiping down desks. As I moved down to the 3rd floor, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't the usual sense of isolation. It was something more unsettling. I glanced back and saw a stranger in the distance following me down the hallway. My heart started to race as I quickened my pace, trying to convince myself that it was just a late-night worker or a visitor who had lost their way. But I couldn't ignore the knowing feeling of unease. I didn't recognize the man, and he didn't look like an employee. I reached the end of the hallway and turned into a room, pretending to focus on my cleaning tasks while keeping an eye on the man's reflection in the window. He was getting closer, his footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. Panic surged through me as I realized he was heading right for the room I was in. I wanted to call out for Eddie, but fear had paralyzed my voice. All I could do was watch as the man entered the room. He was tall with a scruffy beard, and his eyes held an unsettling intensity. He didn't say a word. He just stared at me. Finally, I managed to stammer out, "Can I help you? Are you lost?" The man's lips curled into a chilling smile, and he replied in a low, gravelly voice, "Lost. Now, I'm right where I need to be." My heart pounded in my chest as I fumbled for my phone, my trembling fingers dialing Eddie's number. I knew I needed help, and I hoped he would pick up quickly. But there was no answer from the security guard. The stranger continued to approach me, his gaze never leaving mine. Panic rose in my throat, and I tried to make a break for the door. But before I could reach it, the man lunged at me, his hands outstretched. I screamed, my voice piercing the silence of the office block, and struggled to fend him off. We grappled in the dimly lit room, knocking over cleaning supplies and furniture in our frantic struggle. I could feel the man's strength, and it terrified me. Just when I thought I couldn't fight him off any longer, I heard the sound of footsteps running down the hallway. It was Eddie, the security guard, finally responding to my call for help. He burst into the room, and with a strength I hadn't expected, managed to restrain the intruder. The police arrived shortly after, and they arrested the man. Eddie later explained that he had been patrolling the upper floors and had heard my scream. If he hadn't arrived when he did, I shuddered to think what might have happened. The man was taken away by the police, but he never offered any explanation for his presence in the office block that night. I never found out who he was or what he had intended to do. It was a chilling encounter that left me scared and terrified to work alone at night ever again. To this day, I can't help but wonder what might have happened if Eddie hadn't come to my rescue. Story 2. I'm a private eye, and as such, I work a lot of late-night shifts. People sin the most at night, I always say. It's easier to catch most off guard than to, in my opinion. Now my work typically takes me all over, but much of my work involves catching cheaters in the app. The kind of thing is generally easy to do and kind of boring. So to put it frankly, I was more than a little excited when I was asked to look for someone's missing daughter. I was told to be discreet, and I was paid up front. I didn't even have to ask, and that's something I generally have to fight with people. Usually, I ask for half immediately to pay the bills and half when the job is done. So I guess my alarm bell should have gone off when the client paid all of it up front, no questions asked. Still, I admit I was so relieved by how prompt and upfront they were about the cost that I wasn't about to argue, and I made their case my priority. I was told that the client believed their daughter may have run away. Still, the city is a dangerous place to be running free for anyone, let alone a kid. The girl was supposedly 15, and I figured I'd start my search by asking around the city through my contacts if they'd seen the girl. I got a big fat no from most of my contacts, but then I got a message about a girl that had been seen matching this girl's description 30 miles outside of the city. This had me concerned, and after doing some digging, I was eventually led to a farm. Now, I went here after receiving a tip about the girl. Looking back now, though, I wish I hadn't gone there at all. When I first inspected the place, it was by daylight. There were all the usual and expected private property signs, and after thinking on it, I decided I was going to approach the owners of the farm. Part of me didn't want to, but I was a smooth enough talker. I mainly wanted to get a vibe of the place anyway. I could have done this on my own under cover of darkness, but I wanted to make the owners feel comfortable, and no matter the story they gave me, I was to check the place out anyway later on. I figured if nothing else, I'd get an idea of the lay of the land. So cautiously, I announced myself, and that's when a tall man approached me. He looked to be 64 and of stout build. The man spoke to me in a deep voice and basically asked what the hell I was doing near the farm. I explained I was looking for someone, and I was wondering if they'd seen her around. After showing the photo of the girl, I got a very firm no. I asked if anyone else lived on the farm. Perhaps I could show them the photo after a very tense silence. The man opened the gate and insisted I come in. I cautiously walked ahead of this guy, being certain I was going to be murdered, and never heard from again. As I walked through, I examined the area. It was pretty open, but there was something that caught my attention. It looked like a barn off in the distance. I diverted my attention straight ahead once more to see an old house. We'd walked some distance when two women came out. One was a heavier set one, and the other was quite the opposite. I have nothing against anyone who's overweight, as I have a bit of a belly myself, but the stark contrast was just something I noticed. A shorter man came out and greeted me and asked what it was I needed. On the way out, I quickly drove away after that, but not too far, as I basically took a nap in my car and waited for the night to fall. It wasn't long before my alarm went off, and I realized it was 9 o'clock at night. I slowly drove my car toward the farm and drove by as I looked for a decent area to ditch my car. When I found one, I parked my car, shut it, and ran back to the farm. The vibe of the place was so much different at night. I was sure that this was part of my imagination, and the creepy look of the place at night was just me feeling nervous. Still, I pressed forward, hoping the fence as I did. I worked my way slowly toward the house. I explained to the man I'd been looking for a young girl that had recently been near the area, and I was wondering if they had seen her. The man took a close look at the photo and said he hadn't, that he was often busy working the farm, at which point he'd handed the photo to his wife. She shook her head before turning to their daughter and asked if she had seen the girl. She looked closely and shook her head, saying she hadn't, but she'd keep an eye out in case anything was happening around the farm. I then took the photo and told the family thank you and said I'd be on my way. I even gave them a card to call in the event they saw her. I soon left the farm, escorted by my giant friend. On the way out, I quickly drove away after that, but not too far, as I basically took a nap in my car and waited for the night to fall. It wasn't long before my alarm went off, and I realized it was 9 o'clock at night. I slowly drove my car toward the farm and drove by as I looked for a decent area to ditch my car. When I found one, I parked my car, shut it, and ran back to the farm. The vibe of the place was so much different at night. I was sure that this was part of my imagination, and the creepy look of the place at night was just me feeling nervous. Still, I pressed forward, hoping the fence as I did. I worked my way slowly toward the house. There were no lights on, and all appeared silent. When I approached, I peeked inside the windows and realized there was no activity. So I looked around the area, finding nothing in the yard. I examined a nearby shed. At first, all seemed well. But as I dug further, I noticed some photos. The photos were in a bag titled Family. Looking through them, they seemed innocent enough. That said, something didn't sit entirely right with me. The photos were all of women who looked to be in their teens, smiles on their faces, and wearing strange gowns made out of burlap sack. On top of that, the smiles they wore didn't seem entirely genuine. It looked more than a little forced. Examining these photos just showed the girls hanging out and doing farm work and eating watermelon. I attempted to make a call out to my contact after taking a photo of the photos. I was hoping to see if any of these girls were missing. Naturally, I had no signal out there though, and so I left the shack quietly and headed down the lane toward the fence and back to my car. Once there, I sent a text to one of my friends and asked about these girls. A person said they'd do some digging and get back to me. So I waited for a bit and eventually was told none of them had been missing. Confused, I thanked them and decided I'd get something to eat and get some sleep as daylight was fast approaching, and I wouldn't be able to get anything done then. The day came and went, and I was awoken by my alarm at about 7 o'clock. There was still light out, but I wanted to get some food in me and get ready for a second night out searching. At 10 o'clock, I headed back onto the farm. Once I'd finished eating, it was about 9 o'clock. I had headed back to my hiding spot and waited. At 10 o'clock, I headed back onto the farm. I was quiet, and I once again checked the house, making sure there was no activity. After I realized everything was quiet, I decided I wanted to check the barn in the distance. The area was open, and I couldn't help but feel afraid that someone would see me as I approached the barn itself. That was the least of my worries, though, as I would soon realize. Upon approaching the barn, I saw that it was lit up, with chains all over the doors. As I peeked through the slit in the doors, I could see another door partially covered by hay with a padlock and something else on it. Listening more closely now, I could hear screams for help. I immediately inspected the outside of the barn and kept a close eye on things for movement inside. Listening more closely from the back of the barn, I could hear chanting. I didn't understand the language, but I knew someone was in there. Knowing I wouldn't have signal, I decided it's best to report things to the police from here. I made my way back across the field, but midway across, I heard a gunshot and felt a great deal of pain in my right arm. I couldn't help but cry out in pain as it was so sudden and immense. I looked closely at my arm and kept my head quite low this time. As I did so, I heard another shot fire off, and I felt a bullet whiz through my hair and narrowly miss my skull. Then, I heard an all too familiar loud voice shouting, expressing anger and telling me I'm trespassing on private property. Out of options and unsure what to do, I called out, stating who I was and informing them that if I wasn't out of there in the next few minutes, the police would be raiding the place. This was a desperate lie, and the reality sank in all too quickly that I might not make it out of this place alive. When the voice came back, laughing and telling me they enjoyed the taste of bacon, it was at this moment I knew I was out of options and was screwed if I didn't start moving and fast. I got up and ran, keeping no straight lines or particular patterns. I kept thinking I'd likely be dead any second. But as I made it to the fence and threw myself over, there wasn't another shot fired at all. Perhaps he bought my bluff, perhaps not. But I didn't wait around to find out, as I was desperate to make it to the hiding spot my car was in before driving as best as I could to the nearest gas station and calling 911. I explained the situation and who I was, and they mentioned that they would have authorities out there immediately. I told them I'd come out once I saw the lights, and in the meantime, I'd be in a spot near the farm. I told the authorities that they should be careful, that they're very dangerous, and to bring guns, as these people didn't seem like they cared at all whether the cops showed or not. It wasn't long before I was back at my spot, and the police were already on the scene. I was checked out by paramedics and questioned. I told them that it was fine, but I wanted to be sure the girl I was looking for wasn't there. The police spent the remainder of the night searching the farm, only to find it abandoned. The family wasn't there, and upon breaking the padlock on the barn door, what they found inside was crazy. They found a bunch of photos, but no bodies. The entire area was searched thoroughly, and the clothes of the girl I was searching for were found in the house, but there was no sign of the girl outside of this or the family. It looked like the family had been keeping many girls underneath the farm, but no one ever found them. Some skeletons were found on the property later on, but I never found the girl. I returned the payment I received from the family to them, but they told me to keep it anyways as thanks for at least finding where she was. To my knowledge, this family hasn't seen or heard from her since. Story 3. I won't say my name. I'll just say I'm 32 and a male. I'm a facilities guy for Parks and Rec, and I work nights. Now, facilities guy is just another way of saying I'm the maintenance man. I do a lot of cleaning and any pickup needed. When you work night shift, you have to go around and quickly clean everything and host any nighttime events, as well as cover all facilities in the area before your shift ends around midnight, in my case. One night, I had what you would call a typical work night. Typical work nights, as I call them, are the ones where you don't have any events going on, so you basically just go from facility to facility making sure upkeep is done and doing things like taking out the trash, replacing said trash bags, and making sure there is no vandalism, etc. Being that a lot of our facilities are in and around parks, we get a lot of transients and homeless. The homeless are fine and normally very understanding individuals. If I need them to move on or even just further away from my facility, they are normally very understanding and will comply, at the very least, until I move to the next facility. I'm a nice guy, and I don't like to give people too hard of a time as I've been homeless, and I know what it's like. That said, the transients are almost always a horrible interaction. Transients generally choose to live homeless on purpose and are often addicted to drugs, or will commit crimes because they can. Basically, they are uncooperative 99.9% of the time. And since most of the time they are just released immediately if they are arrested at all, they have no qualms about causing a scene or stabbing you if it's in their interest, or they simply wish to. So, needless to say, I have to be careful. Transients aren't usually a big concern until I get to the last facility of the night. That facility is in our highest crime neighborhood in the city I work now. For the record, I think it's great to have a facility like this in a neighborhood like this, because it helps keep kids from getting into gangs and such like that, which are very prevalent in this neighborhood. That said, working the night in an area like this can go, if lucky, perfectly well and quietly, or be a complete horror show. Now, generally, the gangs in the area won't mess with you if you aren't in their business. You know, just mind your own business. Keep walking. Keep your head down, and you'll be fine. A lot of people I've come across while working my shift will even be understanding of the fact that I'm just doing my job as well. I'm not defending gangs by any means, but I am also not saying that they're bad. You know, I am saying most of the ones in my neighborhood go by, and as long as you stay out of their business, they'll stay out of yours. Anyway, on this night, I was wrapping up my cleanup and was pretty stoked as I had the next 2 nights off. It was around this time I was preparing to do my last check of the facility and clock out and go home. As I was making my rounds, I hear a sudden noise from upstairs. When I say upstairs, I'm referring to an attic area where a lot of ventilation systems are. In order to access it, you need to pull down an attic, which creates steps, and then you'll need to climb a ridiculously tall ladder and hang off of one with one hand to push a fairly heavy door open, so you can climb up to the attic area of the facility. It's not an easy place to access, but you can do so if you know what you're doing and no one is around to see you do it. I don't hear anything for a minute or so, so when I'm comfortable again, I begin turning off the lights. It was around this time I hear another loud bang from above me. Curious, I open the front door and then shut it again, but I don't exit. I shut the lights off, and I'm waiting around now. It is only now I start hearing stomping. I'm a little on edge as it becomes more and more apparent that someone or something is clearly camping out in the attic area. I thought about calling the cops at first, but we've had an issue with raccoons and such finding their way into the building before. And the last time we called the cops to check out something like this, it turned out it was just bats. After just a couple of more minutes of listening, I decided to take a flashlight and check the area myself. Now the attic stairs are going to make a loud enough noise on their own, but if somebody knows that I'm coming, they can't really go anywhere. As such, I also bring my knife with me just in case I climb up and get to the ladder and climb into the attic area itself. I shut the door behind me to make sure I don't fall back through this large drop. The moment the door shuts, I notice all I can hear is my breathing and some of the ventilation and such. I'm slowly scanning the area with my flashlight and keeping my knife close by my other hand as I look around. I noticed a raccoon and its babies at this point. I breathe a huge sigh of relief and prepare to head out. I figure I'll leave a note about the raccoons and the babies, and they'll be able to let animal control handle it in the morning. I'm just about to head back toward the door when I hear a shifting sound. I turned around and suddenly this older bearded guy lurches at me and knocks me on my butt. I lose my flashlight and my knife and decide to feel around to find where my knife went. It was around that time I feel something hard hit the back of my head. I feel dizzy, and when I feel something hit me in my right side between my ribs, shortly after this, I feel it exit and enter me several more times before I'm turned and beaten in the face. I'm dizzy and thinking to myself I'm clocked out, and no one is going to know I'm up here, and I'm gonna die. I try to fight back with what strength I had with any adrenaline that I could afford as the man tries to stab me with an already bloody knife in the chest. I manage to stop him, and struggling and quite dizzy after some rolling around, I'm unable to knock his head into a board and scramble to get up again. I grab my flashlight and see my own knife, which I scramble toward and feel sharp objects stabbing me in the back of my right leg. I'm hurting, but I'm also heated at this point, so I get to my knife. I turn around just in time to stab this guy. I wind up pushing my knife into the side of his head, but out of shock I let go. The man falls over and seems out of it, complaining about his head. I get my phone out and called the police. The last thing I remember was saying something to 911, and the next thing I know I'm awake in a hospital. And there's the sweetest nurse I've ever had looking at me and asking me how I'm feeling. I told her I'm not sure, then I was flooded with memories of what I just experienced, and I started freaking out. She calmed me down and reassured me that I'm going to be okay, that I'm safe now. The police were there, and an officer asked me everything about what happened. I explained what had happened, and he took the story down and reassured me that the man in question would be spending a time in jail, a long time that is. I remember being in shock at the fact that the man was alive. I asked how the man was doing, mostly out of reaction to my shock. The cop said he'd been, alive, but that's all he could say about it. I was out of work for quite a while after that. It was all pay leave until I could recover. I'm still a facilities guy today, but I switched to a day shift, and it's much more comfortable with my job again. The nurse I'd met is my wife now as well. We've been together for about 5 years now, and I can't help but laugh at the morbid irony of it all. I mean, what I experienced was easily the worst experience in my life. That said, had I not experienced it, I never would have met my wife. It's funny how life works. That said, I never want to experience anything like that ever again. Story 4. You can call me Maddie, as I won't share my real name. I was a 911 dispatch worker on a night shift for my area. I won't share my area as I don't feel comfortable doing so. That's it. And you weren't working as a 911 dispatch on any shift can tell you it's a tough job. It's very mentally and emotionally taxing, as it's your responsibility to make sure someone gets the help they need as soon as possible. But some of the things you hear on the other end of the line, well, they're just horrific. We go through a fair amount of training to deal with these things, and there is always an open door if we need more help dealing with things mentally or emotionally with the trials of the job at hand. Anyway, my story revolves around several strange calls I got over the course of several nights, and the strange occurrences that happened soon after. The first night I got one of these calls was in December. It was during most kids' holiday. One of the first things we ask people to give us when we receive a call is the address that they are at. It's a vitally important bit of information as, unless you were calling from a landline, we don't usually know the specific address you are calling from. This is changing as tech changes, but at the time I was doing this, if you were calling from a cell phone, we could trace within the general area in most cases, but we often could not get an exact address. Also, depending on how many cell towers were in the area, if you're in a rural area and you just have poor signal, it can make our job that much harder. Anyway, I get a call, and it's a man who simply says help in a groggy sounding voice, and the line just dies after that. As I said before, if it's a landline, we'd have an address immediately, but this is what makes the call stranger. I have no information appearing at all as to the location of this call. There's generally some form of information, but I can't get anything off of this. Thrown off by this, I inform my supervisor of what just happened. We talked for quite a bit, and she tells me she will look into it if I get another call like this, and just to let her know if it happens again. I'm sure she was worried. Maybe there was something wrong with the system or with my equipment. I continued through the night, and everything is working smoothly. It seems at this point that one strange call has been pushed to the back of my mind and was almost forgotten. At about 6 o'clock in the morning, I'm ready to head home. That's when I get the last call of my night. It's that same groggy voice, and it simply says help before hanging up. Once again, there's no caller information or anything to work with. I talk to my supervisor, who tells me to get home and get some rest, and she'll look into the issue more thoroughly. I go home and crash immediately. The next night, I'm back at it again. I asked my supervisor if she ever figured out what was going on with those calls. She explained that she hadn't, but once again, if I got another one, just signal her, and she'd come and check it out. I believe she figured it was a prank of some kind, but she wasn't allowed to voice it out loud, as we were supposed to take every call seriously, and she seemed to be, regardless of what she might have been thinking. It's about 11 o'clock at night when I get another call, and judging from the lack of data on my computer, I know immediately it's the guy. I signal for my supervisor, who quickly rushes over and answers the call herself. This time there is nothing on the other end, no voice, just breathing. The line then hangs up. Still, there is no information at all. Weirded out, my supervisor has me work on a different computer and system just to see if that changes anything, or if somehow our own equipment is glitching. It's 2 o'clock in the morning when we get another call from this man. Once again, there's no information. My supervisor tries to inform whoever is on the other end that if this is a prank call, they will be charged. There's silence on the line. Then it hangs up again. My supervisor is equal parts confused and also angry, and I'm just at a loss. That said, the remainder of the year goes by without any more calls. Shortly after New Year's, when we get the mysterious call again, I answer and signal for my supervisor. The voice on the other end sounds like some groggy man, the same one from before, and he simply says, "Why didn't you help me this time?" The caller ID turns up. The call was coming from inside our own building. I remember the shock on my supervisor's face, and I remember being completely confused. My supervisor informs me she is going to search the building and asks that I keep doing my job. I agree to do so, but inside, I just have this bad feeling. Nothing is right about these calls. I reluctantly get back to work and try not to overthink the calls I got. It's about 4 o'clock in the morning when I receive another call. It once again is coming from the building. It's the man, but he sounds happier. The words he says next send chills down my spine. "She's mine now." The line hangs up. It is around this time I noticed my supervisor hasn't responded to my signaling, and I haven't seen her since she was going to search the building. Trying to be rational, and assuming she's probably talking with the police who are trying to get things handled elsewhere in the building, I try to continue my job until my shift ends. The second I'm off shift, I see the daytime supervisor, and I ask him if he's seen or heard from the night shift supervisor. He said no, and I begin to get this sinking feeling. I ask him to search the building for her as the last I had heard from her. She was looking into a strange calls we were getting from the building itself. He said sure thing, and I made him swear to search the building. I then went home and tried to get some sleep. It was shortly after I got home that I got a call from the daytime supervisor. He informed me that he found the night shift supervisor hanging in the basement level of the building. It appeared to be a suicide. I remember being freaked out and trying to explain that there was no way it was a suicide. There was no way. I remember being questioned about everything that had happened, and I remember the only answer I was ever given after it was all said and done was that my supervisor's death was a suicide. It was ruled a suicide, and everything pointed to a suicide. I still don't believe it was a suicide. For a few months after this took place, I get calls at varying times of the night, and my personal cell went off duty with that man's voice. He just laughs every time, and that laugh is etched into my memory eternally. I quit my job and moved a few months later. I no longer work in any sort of high-stress job. In fact, I work from home now. I haven't received another call since moving. Story 5. I work at a gas station in New Zealand, and despite the downside of dealing with difficult customers, I have genuinely always loved my job. The station I started at has a lot of homeless people or individuals who are struggling financially, even if they do have a home. One homeless man in particular has become my stalker. When I first started, my coworkers informed me that this man would come in, and we would give him a free cup of hot water, which he would add some sugar sachets to. They mentioned that he's a bit strange but generally harmless, except for his tendency to swear frequently. Since he was homeless, I felt sorry for him, especially during the winter when I first heard about him. So, I happily provided him with his water. However, this man wouldn't just take the water and leave. He would go on rants about all sorts of nonsense, and I could never understand what he was talking about. He'd use the F word every other word, and spoke gibberish in between. Some of my coworkers stopped serving him as he disturbed other customers, but one other coworker and I continued to do so. Looking back, this is probably where the problem started because he began only coming in when I was working alone. I worked from 2 p.m. to 11 p.m., and he would always show up at night. He never came on my days off, which varied each week, so he must have observed and noted my work schedule by passing by during the day, which I noticed him doing often. Over time, I started feeling uncomfortable with his presence and the way he looked at me. However, being raised in a Christian family, I was reluctant to turn him away. My grandfather always told me as a child, "Manners are cheap, and never turn your back on charity," so I continued to serve him. But then he started making comments about my appearance, then my body, and he stopped asking for water. He just wanted me. He would come in, head straight towards me, and linger in the store for what felt like hours. The final straw came when he winked at me and said I always had a friend in him. The way he said it sent chills down my spine. So I decided to stop letting him in the moment I was working alone. I locked the doors because I knew he would appear. The problem was I knew he was watching me. I could sense it. And as soon as the last customer left the forecourt, he would approach the doors. I caught him watching me multiple times a day from alleyways and bushes. We got him trespassed, hoping it would solve the issue. Unfortunately, it didn't. He would still watch me try to get in and yell at me through the doors when I refused to let him in. I called the police every time he showed up, but he managed to escape each time. This went on for months on end. I was scared 24/7 at work and even had nightmares at home. There were countless incidents of harassment, attempted entries, and sightings of him watching me. But the worst one occurred when I was on forecourt duty, filling cars and cleaning the pumps. We have speakers at all pumps that are connected to an intercom inside, allowing us to communicate with customers without having to run outside. It's a large site with 12 pumps. While I was outside, I heard my coworker call me inside through the speakers, her voice filled with panic. Since it was daytime, my initial thought was that a customer was causing trouble. I quickly went inside and immediately heard the doors locked behind me. "Look over there by the bushes," she said with wide eyes. I turned to look, and there he was, peering in. The scariest part, he had one foot lunged forward, as if he was ready to run and attack the moment the doors opened. My heart sank, and I called the police, who arrived remarkably quickly. They were already there as I hung up the phone. The officer taking my statement informed me that he would be charged with criminal harassment, and a restraining order was in place. However, legally they had to issue a warning before he could be arrested, and he was released the same night. But enough was enough. I couldn't handle it anymore. I was constantly terrified. It wasn't a matter of if he would return, but when. The very next day, I handed in my 2 weeks' notice. Management didn't want to lose me and offered me a transfer to a site far away, where he would never find me, or so we thought. I accepted the transfer, and the new site was great. All the staff were instructed not to disclose my new location to anyone, including the regular customers. They were told to say that I no longer worked for the company. For about 3 months, everything was peaceful. There was no sign of my stalker, and I felt safe. I no longer had to constantly look over my shoulder. However, the relief didn't last long. Just a month ago, the officer handling my case informed me that I had to appear in court and testify against him. I was terrified of seeing him again, but I convinced myself it was for the best. I had just come to terms with the fact that I could do it, and I would ensure he was held accountable. But then the worst happened. He found me at the new site. I don't know how he did it, but my best guess is that he asked a new employee at my old site, someone who wasn't aware of him, the stalking, and the restraining order, and they told him. He must have taken a bus or made a remarkably long walk. He was approaching the doors quickly when I spotted him, and I ran away in a panic. I nearly knocked over my boss, who saw the fear on my face and asked what was wrong. In my state of shock and fear, I can't even remember what I said, but my manager locked us in her office and provided incredible support. She called the police and handled everything. I was trembling and in shock. We all believed I was safe at the new site, as the police officer in charge had assured us he would never find me there. While we were on the phone with the police, we witnessed him circling the site at least 3 times before the police arrived and apprehended him and placed him under arrest. Thank God. Needless to say, I couldn't sleep for the next few days as I waited for the court date. The fear of him being released was overwhelming. 2 days before the court hearing, I prayed. I prayed that he would be convicted and that I would be safe. I honestly had no idea what I would do if he was released and knew where to find me again. This might sound dramatic, but anyone who has experienced the trauma of being stalked will understand. I even made the comment, if he gets away, I think I'll kill myself. I genuinely felt that hopeless. Thankfully, my prayers were answered the next day when the officer handling my case called me. "I got some good news," he said. He changed his plea to guilty. I was at work, and I jumped up and down in front of customers. This is the safest I have felt in nearly a year, which has been the longest year of my life. But for now, it's over. Well, mostly. I have a sentencing case coming up where the duration of his sentence will be determined. But for now, I can finally relax knowing this monster is off the streets, and most importantly, unable to come near me. Deep down, I know it's not truly over. My gut tells me that when he's released, he'll come back. This man is obsessed and mentally ill. The only thing keeping me going is the saying, don't borrow trouble before it shows up at your doorstep. But that's the problem. I know he'll be back at my doorstep as soon as he can. Story 6. For context, I'm a male, and I work at a gas station in the Deep South, a part of Louisiana that most people have never even heard of. I'm talking about dirt roads with no name, thick trees that seem to swallow darkness, and you might be lucky enough to see a streetlight every other mile. The little gas station that I work at is located in the trifecta of all these elements. I, of course, work the overnight shifts. The gas station doesn't see much excitement. There are either the 10 customers that come in between the hours of 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., or the random possums that decide to make the trash cans outside their personal drum set. But I digress. The night started like any other night. Make sure that the coffee is fresh. Check. Make sure all the snacks, cold drinks, and beer are properly stocked. Check. Now, all that is left for me to do is to wait. I stood behind the counter looking at inventory, listening to music, and just pacing around for the first couple of hours. You know the thing that people say, time flies. Yeah, that didn't apply to that shift. As I got bored, I decided to leave the register and check out the items on the shelf. 2. Make sure nothing majestically sold itself. While I was on one of the aisles, I heard a man call out, "Hey, you all open?" I turned around to see that I had 2 customers standing at the checkout. Now, I should mention this gas station does not have that fancy system that makes the doors go ding when someone comes in. Top-line security, right? So, I was caught off guard. The 2 customers had come in without my knowledge. I quickly walked up to the register and apologized for the wait. As we were making the usual conversation of, "Hey, how you doing?" And man, it's dark out here in this area. The customer asked another question that is usually always asked. "How long is it until I get to the city from here?" I answered it with the same answer that seems to automatically live in my mind, rent-free. "It's a good couple hours from here. Just go towards the lights." Corny. I know, but that's my thing. Anyway, after scanning the customer's items, which literally was a candy bar and a bottle of water, I told them, "Be careful out there, y'all. There's a tornado warning in this area until 7 a.m., and the rain's picking up in this area. Even on a clear night, it's hard to see what is ahead of you on these dark, desolate roads." As I went to look at the second customer, I realized there was no second customer anymore. I chalked it up to the guy not wanting to wait any longer and decided to just leave. I mean, from what I saw, he didn't have any items with him and probably only needed some cigarettes or something that was behind the counter. I told my customer farewell and was ready to grind out the rest of these hours. But just like a psychic, my own words had foreshadowed my fate for the night. Not long after the customer left, it might have been an hour or so, the sky could no longer hold its sorrow and just wept gallons of tears from above. To me, this is not a big deal. Bad weather, rain, and possums. Yeah, I still have it out for them. Happened a lot in my area. So much so that I call the experience HOA, which stands for humid, wet, and annoying. As the rain and wind picked up, I started to feel a little uneasy, mostly because honestly, I would rather be at my house when the rain and wind decided to battle for dominance. With that being said, the inevitable happened. The power lines were no match for the relentless punishment from the elements. And then, darkness, silence, aggravation. The power had gone out, and there was no backup generator for me. I was just there, standing in a blanket of darkness so thick that it seemed to cover everything in its embrace. I called my manager to let him know that the power had gone out and asked him what I should do. Right now, of course, with it being so late/early, whatever 4 a.m. means to you, there was no response. I thought about locking up and just buckling down at the gas station until the storm passed. After all, I was getting paid. But that's when I heard it. Between the thunder, between the rain, between the wind, I heard a slight crunch coming from one of the aisles further away from the entrance of the station. At first, I paid no mind to the sound. I believed it to just be store items shifting with all of the terrible weather. Darkness had a way of bending your mind, making you see and hear things that your mind usually dismisses as just the wind. But after sitting there for a while, upset of course, but getting paid, I called my manager again, but unfortunately, no answer. Then, right after, the light of my phone faded and my eyes were trying to adjust to the darkness. I heard it again, movement, but this time closer and right in between my phone call and the thunder strike. Like I said, I have listened to this channel for years, so now I'm on high alert. Someone was in here. I was not alone. I just knew it. I tried to calm my nerves, not wanting to be that guy who overreacts. But I asked myself, can you ever really be too safe? I made a potentially dangerous and thoughtless move. I stood up and yelled, "Is anybody still in here?" I got no response, but that didn't mean that there was no one there. The air felt thick from humidity. Not just that, though, that feeling you get when you're not alone. The feeling of being watched, as cliche as it sounds. I remembered something that I knew all along. There is no ding on the door to let me know when customers enter or exit. That, and the thought of that second customer came to mind. I never saw him leave. I just knew that he was there and then gone. Automatically, without a doubt, I felt that something was strange, something was not right. So I did what any gas station worker would do in the pitch black. Pretended to be a ninja so that I could slowly make my way to the source of the noise without being caught. As it turns out, I'm not a ninja. The moment I stepped from behind the counter that I had been sitting behind, a voice stopped me in my tracks. "Give me what you got," was all that the void softly spoke to me. I froze, scared, too scared to say a word or move an inch. When I called out, I wasn't truly expecting a response. Soon, I heard footsteps, slow but getting closer. My mind, yeah, I'll do something, run, charge at the sound and hope for the best. After all that, though, I did nothing. And then his face appeared, a face that I wouldn't have seen if my manager hadn't called me back at that moment, allowing my phone to light up. The second customer, as it turns out, he never left. I pretended not to see or know that I recognized him. And again he repeated, "Come on, give me what you got now." Still in a calm and calculating way, I spoke for the first time after noticing that I was holding my breath the whole time. "All I have is $250 in the register." He was quiet for a while, but then told me, "Give it over." I wish that I could say that I pulled out some special move that brought the guy down, allowing me to hold him until the police showed up. But this is real life. I gave him the money, and luckily for me, he accepted it. He knew that the police would not be here in these parts, at this time, and with this weather, and even if called, it would take at least 30 minutes to get there. The local, I assumed, had to be so confident. I talked to the manager and the police. After all was said and done, my manager apologized I had to go through that, and also apologized for not answering sooner. I told him, no worries, everyone deserves sleep. I got to leave early, and the manager closed the store for a couple of hours until the next employees came in. I was so lost in a trance after that situation that I truly believe that it still couldn't be real, that couldn't have just happened to me after a couple of years of working there. And that was that. I thought, a funny plot twist. 2 weeks later, a man was caught trying to hold up a gas station close to where my job was located. A man that I remembered from that flash of light on my phone. The only difference is he didn't get away this time. The thing that I can really say that I've learned from all of this is no matter how comfortable or how much you think you know how each day will play out, always be on guard. Story 7. So this happened a little over 2 years ago now, and I wanted to post it somewhere just to look back at it one day and never forget the lesson I learned. So I figured sharing it on your show was the best way to do this. It was 2016, and I just started a new job at a motel. It was low pay, but I needed an office job. One of my friends, Michael, got me this job. For a few days, I did training with the owner in the mornings. For 2 nights, Michael trained me. Our job was the 11 o'clock p.m. to 7 o'clock a.m. shift. Nothing exciting. Checking guests in and doing paperwork. My boss, the owner, went away with his wife on vacation for about a week, which is attributed to the swift training I had to endure. So it was my first night alone on the night shift. There was a monitor with security cameras around the motel's property and a large glass window all around the office building with a glass door. There was no night window like most motels have. It was fairly early in the night, at about 1 a.m., and I was just doing my normal check-in paperwork when the man walks in and asks if we have any rooms available. Usually, if someone is sketchy, my boss has me lie and say no, but he seemed normal at the moment. Without hesitation, I said yes, of course, just for one. And he replied yes. So I began creating the reservation on the computer. When I noticed, he started swatting the air and making spitting noises as if he was surrounded by flies. I tried to ignore it. As far as I was concerned, it wasn't my business, so I tried to check him into the room as quickly as possible. I give him his key, and he's on his way. At this point, I could be described as very timid. I had a lot going on in my personal life, so I hope you can understand my reaction to what happens next. The man comes back from his room and slams his hand on the glass door, causing me to jump absolutely frightened. I look up to see him just staring at me. He cracks the door and puts his head through and says, "I can't get into my room. Why won't you let me into my room?" And my only defense is trying to be helpful, so I replied, "Maybe there's something wrong with your key. Let me give you another one." The look he had in his eyes was inexplicable. I felt like I was in absolute danger. I handed him his new key, and he went back to his room. I tried texting Michael because he is the one who trained me, though it was the middle of the night, and he was probably asleep. I needed some guidance. With no reply from Michael, I noticed a man charging down the stairs to come back, and I go into an absolute panic. I run into the back office and lock the door, and I pull out my pocket knife. It's important to keep protection when working at night. I hear the man in the office yelling, "Hello, hello, why won't you let me into the room? Do not like me." Me being an absolute idiot, and not standing my ground and calling the police when I'm feeling scared, I decide to take the situation on alone. I reply, "I'm just on the phone. I'll be right out." And I start calling Michael over and over for help. No answer. I decided to take a few deep breaths and then step out of the office. The man was not there. He was in the bathroom. I started hearing him talking to himself angrily, saying, "Kill her, kill her." My heart sank. I stopped being an idiot, not calling the police. He comes out and says, "Your key was broken. I'm sorry. Let me escort you to your room." He agrees. Thankfully, I was wearing a long-sleeved sweater, so with my arms down, I was able to hide my knife in my hand while holding it. I began to walk outside, and he seemed insistent to walk behind me. We begin making our way to the staircase and up towards his room. I was sweating from how nervous I was, continuously looking behind me to make sure he wasn't going to make a move. He stops at a room, and I stop at his room a few doors down. I smile and say, "Oh, that's the wrong room. This is your room," as I clearly said on the door the whole time. He was going to someone else's room and trying to open the door. I felt bad for them. I quickly ran back to the office and locked the door. The next guest I checked in was a police officer from a few towns away. I felt bad for confiding in them about the guy, but they seemed willing to keep an eye on the house. The next night, the man came back, but I had the doors locked and told him we were all booked up. I explained to my boss what happened when he got back from vacation. However, he didn't take me seriously. I continued to work there on the night shift for the next year, when many other strange encounters happened. Story 8. I recently got a job at a hotel downtown from where I live. I have never worked in the hotel industry before, so I had no idea what to expect. The time between applying for the job and being hired was less than 24 hours, which made me kind of nervous, honestly. But I had been looking for several months and couldn't find anything, so I thought I'd take a chance. This hotel is about 150 years old and has plenty of character. Behind the front desk, there are places where the wallpaper was torn away, revealing the psychedelic wallpaper from what I can only guess was the 70s. We're talking a bright pink, neon green, hookah-induced vision type of wallpaper. The walls on the upper floors are painted bright orange and yellow, and the hallways are narrow enough to give off a shining kind of feel to it. But I'll elaborate on that later. My manager is a young Chinese man in his mid-20s, only 5 years older than me. The man who owned the building is also Chinese and literally a walking stereotype. The owner is friendly and kind to the employees, but he's also rich enough that he doesn't really care if the hotel isn't up to par. I learned recently that he also owns one of the more rundown shopping centers downtown. So this time I explained the less than 5-star quality of the hotel, probably about a 3.5 star in my opinion. Some people describe the place as quaint, unique, and full of characters, while others describe it as outdated or disappointing. As a history enthusiast, I would agree that the place is full of character, but I also think the owner should be a little more concerned about keeping the place clean. There are lots of problems in this hotel, including mice, broken toilets, falling ceiling tiles, leaks, and other maintenance nightmares. The fancier rooms on the upper levels have real fireplaces in them, so that adds the risk of fires if carelessly used. Mice are a common problem, and I'm thankful the guests don't have to see all the dusty traps filled with dead rodents in the basement. By far, the most interesting aspect of the hotel is that it's supposed to be haunted. There are 2 ghosts reported in the building, as well as the adjoining pub next door. Back when the hotel was first built, it had the reputation of being a complete dive. A lady named Lady Churchill died in the hotel, and her spirit supposedly lingers in the haunted room 49. Guests will occasionally smell her perfume or see her face in the mirror. One of the most frightening stories included someone opening the door, only to have Lady Churchill fly at them in fury. On my first day, when my boss toured me around the hotel, he pointed out the haunted room to me. Lady Churchill has also been spotted at the fireplace in the pub, arguing with her boyfriend and the other resident ghost, Brady. Brady was apparently stabbed to death in the basement stairwell. The stairwell is not in use anymore, as it leads directly into the basement instead. It's used to store extra chairs and miscellaneous items. The light has never turned on, which adds more of a creep factor. My shift is the day shift from 7 o'clock a.m. to 3 o'clock p.m. Every morning when I come in, I have to check the entire hotel by myself in search of homeless people sleeping in the back stairwell or trying to get into the basement. I'm not an intimidating person. I'm a short female, not physically fit, and too friendly for my own good. If I did find someone hiding in the hotel, what was I supposed to do about it? I'm not sure, which creeps me out more. The fact that I'm going around looking for people who shouldn't be there, or the idea that I have to walk through the dark and silent areas known to be haunted all by myself. My sweep of the hotel includes all 4 floors of guest rooms, the kitchen, the back stairwell, the basement stairwell, and the basement. To give you some context, the back stairwell serves as a fire escape, connecting all the floors together. It goes straight down to the street level. It's always cold and echoing in there. And as I said before, full of dead mice. When I was first told about the haunted stairway, I mistakenly thought they meant the fire escape stairs. They go down to the basement level. The 4 floors of guest rooms, in all their overlook hotel glory, are shaped like a square horseshoe, which means more than enough blind corners where creepy twins might suddenly appear. Lady Churchill's haunted room is at the end of a hall around one of these blind corners. And yes, I do think about that every time I search the hotel. There is an elevator and an interior stairway that guests are supposed to use. Behind the elevator is the old connecting hallway that basically serves no purpose anymore. In the past, it may have been useful, but now just serves as a secret passageway that goes behind the elevator and comes out at the other end of the horseshoe. This hallway especially needs to be searched for homeless people, drunks, or people having sex. The basement is by far the creepiest part of the hotel. To get there, you can either take the elevator or go through the pub and down the stairs. I prefer to go through the pub because there are some fascinating black and white photos from when the hotel was first built, and I love to look at them. It's also the best place to see the age of the brick foundation. Anyway, the basement is used for storing beer kegs, firewood, plant reports, housekeeping items, and maintenance tools, among other things. It's usually deserted. Now that I know the dark, unused basement stairway is where Brady's spirit is supposed to be, I think I'll try to spend even less time down there. This week is my 2nd week of work, and my boss has put me on the afternoon and evening shift, just so I can get a sense of what it's like, in case I have to cover anybody in the future. Yesterday was my first late shift, and in the time, I learned a whole bunch of things I didn't know from the lady I worked with. This woman, let's call her Peggy, has been at the hotel for 14 years. She's seen all there is to see and is well known for her stories. I've listened to some of these stories, and honestly, part of me thinks she's full of crap, but the other part is going to cautiously believe her on the off chance that it's true. Here are some things I learned about the hotel in the span of one shift. The man I'm replacing was not actually fired for chronic lateness, as the boss told me, but instead for sexual harassment. The head of housekeeping, a man I get along very well with, is a friend of his. The day before, Peggy caught a drug addict rooting around in the private back office after hours. We looked over the security footage. He was definitely searching for something. We now keep the office doors locked. There were 2 guests several years ago who stayed at the hotel, and the next day, they robbed a jewelry store downtown and fled back to the hotel with everything they'd stolen. There was a massive police standoff on the roof, SWAT teams and all. There's a news article about it online. Otherwise, I'd never have believed it. The bedrock of the hotel can be found in the boiler room. There's a slight gap filled in on the top right corner that connects directly to the street. One time, Peggy came down to the boiler room to find a man halfway through the gap. at first trying to get in because he wanted to know what was down there. That image terrifies me. During the span of that one-night shift, an alarm went off in the basement. The police showed up at the pub and aggressively abused the day staff over non-existent shuttles to the hospital. No, not an ambulance. Taking the bus was beneath him, I suppose. And on my bus stop after my shift, a man was shooting up in public. My city has a drug epidemic going on right now. My bus took half an hour to arrive, and when I got off at my stop, it was as funky as Silent Hill. I felt as though I would be looking around for Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees. It is October after all. That's one night shift down. I have another tonight, and one more the day after. If anything else interesting happens, I'll keep you updated. I mostly just wanted to get this off my chest. It's amazing how different the hotel is after 3 p.m. Much louder, that's for sure. Thanks to the pub on one side and the bar on the other. Everyone I've gotten to know during my first week of work has already gone home, leaving me with drunks, strangers, and Peggy's crazy stories. One thing's for sure. After 3 nights of this, I'll never complain about getting up early again.